You probably feel lazy right now. Maybe you're lying on your couch when you should be doing something productive. Maybe you're procrastinating on work. Maybe you just can't be bothered to get up. But here's what you've never wondered. Are animals lazy too? And I mean actually lazy. The way you are when you know you should be doing something but just don't feel like it? Because that's the real question, isn't it? We all assume animals are these tireless machines, hunting when they need to hunt, working when they need to work. But what if they're not? What if animals experience the exact same mental resistance to effort that we do? What if laziness isn't just a human personality flaw, but something that runs deep in the animal kingdom? Well, I've spent the last week reading research papers that absolutely destroy what we think we know about animal motivation. And some of these findings are going to make you reconsider how you think about literally every animal on the planet. Let's start with the most obvious example, your pet dog. You know how your dog gets those phases where it just lies there all day, ignoring toys, ignoring treats, barely responding when you call its name? Most people assume the dog is just tired, just needs rest. But here's what behaviorists have discovered. Dogs actually experience something called activity suppression. It's not fatigue, it's not a physical need for rest. It's literally the dog saying, I don't feel like doing that right now. Your dog is choosing laziness, and it gets weirder. Researchers at the University of Tokyo did something fascinating. They put dogs through a series of tasks. Some tasks were hard and required effort. Some were easy. Then they watched what happened when the dogs got to choose. The dogs consistently chose the easier tasks, even when the harder tasks offered bigger rewards. They weren't being efficient. They weren't being strategic. They were being lazy. They were literally opting out of effort for no reason other than the fact that effort was required. But dogs are domesticated. They've been living with humans for thousands of years. Maybe laziness is something we accidentally trained into them. So what about wild animals? Surely wild animals don't have the luxury of being lazy. They need to hunt. They need to survive. They need to be constantly working. Except that's not what we see at all. Mountain lions in the wild are incredibly lazy. A mountain lion will kill a deer, eat its fill, and then spend the next several days just lying next to the carcass, eating occasionally, moving around as little as possible, sometimes for days. They have food. They could be hunting. Instead, they're just vibing. Scientists call this optimal foraging behavior. But what it really means is that the lion has decided effort isn't worth it right now. And this brings us to something really important, the concept of effort discounting. This is the idea that an animal will place a lower value on a reward if getting that reward requires more effort. Sounds logical, right? But it goes further than logic. It becomes irrational. An animal will sometimes reject a reward that's completely within its grasp if it requires just a little bit more effort than usual. Researchers did an experiment with rats. They set up a scenario where a rat could get chocolate by pressing a lever. Chocolate is basically the ultimate reward for a rat. It's like if someone offered you unlimited chocolate chip cookies. The rats would press the lever constantly. But then the researchers changed the setup. Now, to get the chocolate, the rat had to press the lever multiple times. More effort, more work, and what happened? The rats pressed the lever less, even though the chocolate was still there. Even though they still wanted the chocolate, the effort barrier made them less willing to engage. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. When the researchers made the lever easier to press, the rats went back to working for the chocolate. So it's not that the rats were tired. It's not that they didn't want the reward anymore. It's that their motivation is directly tied to the effort required. Less effort feels possible. More effort feels impossible, even if the amount of effort is objectively tiny. This is laziness in its purest form. This is an animal choosing inaction not because it needs rest, but because the mental resistance to effort outweighs the desire for reward. And it's not just rats and dogs. Primates do this constantly. Chimpanzees in captivity will literally have food available to them and just not move. They'll sit there looking at the food, knowing it's there, and still choosing to stay still. Zoo researchers have noticed that primates seem to have preferred activity levels. Some chimps are naturally more active than others. And that's not just personality. That's their individual laziness set point. There was a famous study where researchers offered capuchin monkeys the choice between two tasks. Both tasks gave rewards. One was easier and gave a smaller reward. One was harder and gave a larger reward. The researchers assumed the monkeys would learn that the harder task was worth it, that they'd eventually choose the harder task because the reward was better. Instead, most of the monkeys just kept choosing the easier task over and over, regardless of how much reward they were leaving on the table. They literally preferred being lazy to being richer. Now, you might be thinking, okay, these animals are making choices about effort, but is that actually laziness? Or is that just economics? Isn't every animal just trying to conserve energy? That's a good question. And the answer is more complicated than you'd think. Because there's a difference between energy conservation and laziness. Energy conservation is a strategy. It's optimal. A bear that hibernates through winter isn't being lazy, it's being efficient. A sloth that moves slowly isn't being lazy. It's adapted to its environment in a way that conserves calories. That makes sense evolutionarily. But laziness is different. Laziness is when an animal rejects effort even when that effort would make its life measurably better. It's when the effort barrier becomes the deciding factor, not the actual cost-benefit analysis. And we see this happen constantly. There's a phenomenon called behavioral inertia. It means that animals tend to keep doing whatever they're already doing, even when switching to something else would be better. So a bird that's been foraging in one spot will keep foraging there even after the food is gone, because switching to a new spot requires effort. Moving requires effort. Changing requires effort. A fish will stay in a corner of its tank where the current is comfortable, even though there's better food in another part of the tank. The other fish aren't lazy, right? The fish is just being smart about minimizing effort. Except it's not. Because if you make the movement between spots easier, if you create a small current that helps the fish move, suddenly the fish will venture out for the better food. The fish didn't want the food more. The circumstances just made laziness less viable. This is such a universal thing that primatologists have a term for it: low activity baseline. It means that many primates, especially when they're in captivity or when food is abundant, just have a default state of doing very little. They're not depressed. They're not sick. They're just not motivated to do more than necessary. And we're starting to understand why. It's about something called the effort paradox. The effort paradox is the observation that the brain is an expensive organ. It uses a massive amount of your body's energy just to think and move and make decisions. From an evolutionary perspective, conserving mental energy is important. It's valuable. It makes sense. But the brain doesn't distinguish between necessary effort and unnecessary effort. When your brain perceives that an action requires effort, it automatically makes that action less appealing. And this happens at a level you don't consciously control. You can't decide not to be lazy. Your brain does it for you. This is why you feel unmotivated, even when you know you should be motivated. Your brain is literally assigning effort to the task and making it seem less rewarding. That's not a personal failing. That's neurobiology. And if that's happening in your brain, it's happening in animal brains too. Which means laziness isn't a choice. It's a feature of how brains work, which is absolutely wild when you think about it. But let's dig deeper into specific animals because different species have completely different laziness profiles. Cats are obviously the poster children for laziness. A cat will sleep between 12 and 16 hours a day, sometimes more, and most of that isn't because they need the sleep. It's because they're doing a cost-benefit analysis in their brains and determining that sleeping is better than doing almost anything else. But here's the thing. Cats are calculated about their laziness. They're not randomly lazy. They're strategically lazy. A cat will be completely lethargic when there's nothing to gain. But the second you make something interesting happen, a toy, a potential prey animal, a threat, the cat goes from utterly motionless to completely athletic. The capability was always there. The laziness was a choice, which means cats have figured out something that most animals haven't. They've realized that expending effort when there's no return on investment is stupid, so they don't do it. Sloths are similar, except they've taken it even further. A sloth moves at about 0.15 miles per hour. That's the speed of a geological formation. But here's what we always miss. Sloths aren't lazy because they're slow. They're slow because they're lazy about energy expenditure, and their entire physiology has adapted around that laziness. They have a slower metabolism, they have different digestive systems. They've literally evolved around the principle of doing as little as possible. From a sloth's perspective, moving faster would be like us deciding to run everywhere. Our entire body would have to change. We'd need more muscle, we'd need more calories, we'd need more oxygen. It would be exhausting. So we choose to walk, or sit, or stay in bed scrolling on our phones. The sloth made the same calculations 60 million years ago and just never stopped making it. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Some animals don't seem to be lazy at all. Hummingbirds, for instance. A hummingbird beats its wings about 80 times per second. It's constantly moving, constantly working, constantly expending energy. A hummingbird should be the least lazy animal on the planet. And yet, hummingbirds actually experience something called torpor. When the environment gets cold or food becomes scarce, a hummingbird will essentially shut down. Its heart rate drops from 1,260 beats per minute to 40. Its body temperature drops by 50 degrees. It basically becomes a tiny feathered coma. This is the opposite of laziness. This is strategic laziness. The hummingbird isn't being lazy, it's being smart. It's entering a state where effort is literally impossible because the animal has turned down its metabolism to survive. And that brings us to an important distinction. There's laziness that's adaptive and laziness that's not. A lot of animals are lazy as a survival strategy. During the winter, many animals enter a state of torpor or hibernation. Their heart rates drop, their body temperatures lower. They're not moving, not hunting, not looking for food. But this isn't laziness in the way we think of it. This is optimization. The animal is using less energy because it can't get food anyway, so using energy would be counterproductive. But there's another kind of laziness. The kind where an animal has resources available but chooses not to use them because effort feels like too much. And that's the kind we see in primates, in dogs, in rats, in fish, in basically any animal with a sufficiently complex brain to make choices about motivation. Which brings us to the real question. If animals get lazy, does that mean laziness is just a normal part of how brains work? The answer is yes. And it's actually not a bad thing. Effort discounting. The tendency to devalue rewards based on the effort required. This is a feature, not a bug. It's a way of protecting energy. It's a way of saying, this reward isn't worth the cost. And sometimes that's exactly the right call. The problem is that effort discounting doesn't always adjust for reality. Your brain is making its calculation based on how the effort feels, not based on how the effort actually impacts you. So you might devalue a reward that actually would be worth the effort. You might skip exercise because your brain is assigning too much effort value to it. You might avoid a phone call because your brain thinks it's harder than it actually is. This is where humans differ from other animals, by the way. We're aware of our laziness. We know we're being lazy, and sometimes we can override it through sheer willpower. An animal can't do that. An animal's effort calculation is what it is. There's no arguing with your brain chemistry. But even humans struggle with this. Even with our advanced brains and our ability to consciously override our instincts, we still choose laziness all the time. Because laziness isn't something we need to eliminate, it's something we need to manage. Think about it this way. If effort felt easy, you'd never rest. You'd keep working and moving and thinking until you collapsed. The fact that effort feels hard sometimes is actually protecting you. Your brain is saying, hey, we need to slow down. We need to conserve. We need to rest. That's a good thing. The problem is that effort feels hard even when you could benefit from doing it. And that's where animals and humans are exactly the same. A dog could benefit from a walk, but the effort barrier is too high, so the dog stays on the couch. You could benefit from going to the gym, but the effort barrier is too high, so you stay on the couch. The dog isn't making a rational decision. You're not making a rational decision. You're both just responding to the effort barrier your brains are constructing, which is kind of depressing when you think about it. You're not uniquely lazy. You're not uniquely unmotivated. You're just experiencing the same cognitive system that every other animal with a brain experiences. Your laziness is biological. But here's the thing. Once you understand that, you can work with it instead of against it. If effort is the barrier, then reducing effort is the solution. That's why breaking tasks into smaller chunks works. That's why implementing systems and habits works. You're not trying to overcome laziness. You're trying to reduce the effort barrier your brain is perceiving. Animals understand this instinctively. A rat will work for chocolate if pressing the lever is easy. A dog will go for a walk if getting ready to go for a walk doesn't require much effort. A fish will venture out for better food if the current is helping it move. We just need to apply the same principle to our own lives. But let's come back to animals for a second, because there's one more thing about animal laziness that's really fascinating. Some animals seem to use laziness as a social signal. Wolves, for instance. In a wolf pack, the alpha wolf is typically the most active, the most engaged, the most motivated. The subordinate wolves are more passive, more careful, more willing to rest and let others take the lead. This isn't just personality, it's status. The wolf that's willing to be lazy is the wolf that doesn't have to be in charge. Similar patterns appear in primates. A high-status chimp is active, assertive, constantly engaging with its environment. A low-status chimp is more cautious, more willing to rest, less likely to pursue resources aggressively. Is the low-status chimp lazy because it has lower motivation? Or is it deliberately appearing lazy to avoid conflict? Or is it that low-status animals in a social structure experience higher stress, which makes effort feel harder, which makes them more lazy? Probably all of the above. Because laziness isn't a single thing, it's a bundle of interconnected biological and psychological processes. It's energy conservation, it's effort discounting, it's stress response, it's social signaling. It's all of these things happening at the same time, which is why animals are lazy in such different ways. An apex predator like a lion or a tiger will be lazy in its hunting. It'll spend days barely moving, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Then it'll put in a burst of effort and kill something. Then it'll go back to being almost catatonic for days. A prey animal like a deer or a rabbit will be lazy about vigilance when it feels safe, But the second something feels off, it goes from 0 to 100 instantly. Its laziness is conditional on safety. A social animal will adjust its laziness based on its social position. A dominant animal will have different laziness patterns than a subordinate animal. An animal with abundant resources will be lazier than an animal with scarce resources. But not by as much as you'd expect. Even with abundant resources, animals often choose to be lazy when they could be gathering more resources. They choose the status quo over improvement. This is something that's really important for understanding behavior. It's the idea that animals are not optimizers. They're not trying to maximize their outcomes. They're trying to minimize their effort and risk while maintaining baseline survival. If that means leaving food on the table, then they'll leave food on the table. Humans are similar. We're not optimal. We're satisficers. We're trying to find the good enough solution that requires the least effort. And our brains are specifically designed to resist the effort required to move beyond good enough, which is why so many people are unhappy. We're settling. Not consciously. We're settling because effort discounting is making anything better seem impossibly hard. But here's what's interesting. Animals never seem unhappy about their laziness. A dog doesn't lie on the couch wishing it had the motivation to go for a walk. It lies on the couch because lying on the couch is the correct decision given how its brain is calculating effort and reward. We, on the other hand, experience cognitive dissonance. We know we should do something. We want to do something, but we also feel intensely resistant to doing it, and we hate ourselves for it. We call it laziness like it's a character flaw, like we're failing, like we're weak. But we're not. We're just experiencing the same biological system that every other animal experiences. We're just aware enough to realize we don't like how it's making us behave, which might actually be the real difference between humans and other animals. It's not that we're less lazy, it's that we're aware of our laziness, we judge ourselves for it, and we can try to override it even though our brains are actively resisting. That's not a weakness, that's actually kind of remarkable. So the answer to the original question, do animals get lazy like us, is yes, they do. They get lazy for the same reasons we do. Same effort barriers, same effort discounting, same tendency to avoid exertion and prefer inaction. But they don't have the added layer of self-judgment that makes human laziness feel like a failure. They're just lazy, and then they move on. Maybe we could learn something from that. Maybe the goal isn't to become less lazy. Maybe the goal is to reduce the effort barriers that make things feel impossible. And maybe, just maybe, we need to stop treating laziness like it's an enemy and start treating it like information. Information that says, this activity is requiring more effort than it should. Reduce the effort, make it easier, and then see what happens. Because laziness isn't going away. Not in you, not in animals. It's too fundamental. It's written into how brains work. But laziness that's managed, that's understood, that's worked with instead of fought against, that's actually a different thing entirely. And maybe that's the real secret that animals know and we've somehow forgotten.